Cheers. So hopefully the purpose of this video is to help someone who's considering the 17 litre safari tank into my thoughts. I'm going to briefly discuss the why I got one, the install, the rideability on adventure rides as well as in the tight stuff, and that all important question of which colour is best. So when I first got my DRZ, I was doing single trail for a couple of hours and there was never any stress about running out of fuel. Then we ventured on a mini adventure ride. We got about 75 to 80 kilometres into the ride and we were close to that point of no return fuel wise. Either we keep going and find a fuel station or we head back. So we headed back and we made it on the dregs, and it got me started on thinking about extra fuel capacity and extra range. So initially my first thoughts were, great, I'll just use a jerry can from the lawnmower, extra 5 litres of fuel. And I tried it and it seemed to cam lock pretty well on the back rack. Felt pretty sturdy, but that's a fair bit of extra weight on the back of the E model, which only has the aluminium frame, rear frame. So probably not a real good combination when you're on those heavy corrugated roads. I also thought about the roto packs being probably the next cheapest option, and I'm sure they're really great on certain areas, but again, that weight plus the camping gear, it sort of turned me off a bit. The 17 litre safari tank was my next option. Initially I was hesitant due to the high cost at about $476 plus postage and that extra bulk and weight up front. So I was trying to do the research on Google, on forums and here on YouTube to see just how bulky it was. Unfortunately I didn't have any mates I could just go and hop on theirs to see how it feels. I was kind of reassured with what I found online, but there wasn't a whole heap, to be honest. Here you can see the standard 10 litre tank with that 17 litre Safari. It is noticeably bigger. It's pretty common to hear people squeezing over 19 litres into it. I can't say I've exactly measured, as I just filled up with leftover jerrys and at the Bowser at the servo. My first thoughts on the first strap around the block with the new tank was my knees just seemed to glue to it nicely. That standard tank, I had to squeeze my knees into it, whereas the Safari, it's just that bit wider and it sits between the knees more comfortably. First points to Safari. Initial thoughts around corners on the road, it felt good. Almost like that extra weight helped plant the front tyre into the ground. I could turn the front suspension up a click or two, and I think that'll help. I didn't get any video of the fitting process, but I did take a couple of photos. Basically, I followed the advice on the instructions provided. However, I did improvise a step or two. The rubber on the inside of the tank to the frame is pretty firm when you first get it, so lining up the mounting holes solo was quite tricky. I used a ratchet strap to bring the tank into alignment and actually worked quite well. The other thing was a mate, he borrowed a tool that had a socket attachment on an old screwdriver to place the mounting bolts through. And that's because the Safari tank is bulkier, has bulkier shrouds, which is also part of the tank. A bit of tape to hold the bolts onto that socket and was able to fit them in and get a start was really good. I then used a standard socket extension to fit them properly. So overall, with the whole thing kitted up with the petcock, fuel lines, everything, it took me about an hour and a half and I was mucking around a fair bit. Someone who's on a mission probably could have halved that or even less. My first shakedown ride was a couple of 100-kilometre trip through the Wongai State Forest from Hervey Bay to Binghamton. It was about 105 kilometres each way with the tracks that we took, and it felt fine during the whole ride, no noticeable difference. I didn't notice any difference between the full tank weight and the end of the ride. What I did notice was my knee was slightly uncomfortable from rubbing the tank the whole day. So although it was only a couple hundred Ks, with all the corrugations and everything and the potholes, it was a 6 to 7 hour trip. So there was just a little bit of discomfort, and that's because I wasn't used to that riding position. A bit like a sore bum by the end of that day. Not used to the saddle. So there's another point to the safari. No regrets yet. So it was nice to note from that mini adventure ride that my mate that I was riding with, he had the standard tank and he was relieved when we got to Binghamton, so he could refill. He needed a bit over half a tank. He was beyond that point of no return, whereas I simply bought an iced coffee and a servo burger and just relaxed until we took the long haul home. That peace of mind of being able to do a full day ride without fear of running out of fuel, it's a good feeling. Before our next ride, my mate, he got a good deal on a safari tank as well, so now we're no worries. On our first camping trip with the bikes, mine was fully loaded and my mate's was lightly loaded. There were some differences in how they handled. My mate's bike, which he's had suspension work modified to account for extra weight, handled a bit smoother than my standard suspension with that extra weight. I later realised that at camp that night that I could adjust those shock clickers a few turns, and that did make a big difference the next day. So that extra weight on the back, I did find it a bit harder at times to raise that front wheel over, some bigger potholes or little logs and things. I'd say it's a combination of me needing more experience and maybe a little bit of suspension work to account for that extra weight. I'll probably try a couple of clicks on the front shocks to see how that goes first. We didn't go far for that trip, and we didn't need to worry about fuel, which meant we could just find that perfect camp spot. Cumbersome? That's a big word. I can't think of a time where the tank has had an impact in the single trails. The bit of a worry I had was quickly put to rest basically. The DRZ 400, it's not as nimble as a little 250. So the safari tank hasn't really made any difference to the way it feels on the tracks. It's still forgiving to my riding ability and it just chugs its way through. Decisions. Definitely a personal choice. Probably one I ummed and ahed about for a little bit. I initially ordered the yellow one, as most of my plastics are yellow. Then I saw someone else who was fitting a black one to theirs, and it was the same model with the black rims, and I thought it looked pretty cool. And my order hadn't actually processed yet due to the COVID demands, so I changed mine to black. My mate, he got a good deal on the translucent one, which I also think is pretty cool. It is nice to see just where your fuel line is at a quick glance, but I don't mind resetting my trip meter each time I refuel and just sort of gauge on 350 Ks being pretty comfortable range. Much of a muchness really. So at the end of the day, the bigger tank, it's going to let you go further between refills. It's going to take that worry out of, am I going to make it? And pretty worthwhile investment in my opinion. So if you're planning more than a couple of hours in the single trails, bigger tank's a winner. Hope this video was useful to someone who's considering a bigger tank for their DRZ or any potential adventure bike. If you thought this video was alright, let me know with a comment or a like or subscribe. I am going to try and do more planned and structured videos regarding biking, fishing and camping this year. So till then, cheers.